So here I have sourdough starter, and I have it at 3 different stages. So once you have your sour starter up and running, now you need to maintain it. So firstly, when you get your sourdough through a friend or you buy it or you make it yourself, you really only need about 3 tablespoons to keep it going. So in this little jar, I only put about this much in the jar of the mother. And then I add 1/3 cup flour and up to 1/3 cup water. The reason I say up to 1/3 is sometimes your sourdough starter eats the flour, which is what it feeds off of mostly, and then it ends up getting a little bit more liquidy. It doesn't stay thick. So depending on the consistency, I might not add all the 1/3 water. When you're mixing your sourdough starter, always use a wooden spoon, never metal. Last night, I put my 3 tablespoons of my mother in here, and then I added my 1/3 cup and most of my 1/3 cup of water. And then I placed an elastic band at the point at which that amount was in the jar. The reason for the band is so that you can see how much the sourdough has bubbled up and risen. Usually that happens in the first 5, 6, 7 hours. This I put straight into the fridge after I mixed it up because I wasn't making bread today. But I'll just show you. I just took it out of the fridge, and that's the consistency. It's a little bit bubbly. You can use it at this stage. It's not a problem. So sometimes this jar will overflow just because I didn't make the bread the next day, and if I'm maintaining my flour or my sourdough and not starter and not putting it in the fridge, then I leave it on the counter and it needs to be fed every day. 1/3 cup flour and up to 1/3 cup water. So once this then overflows, I dump it into my larger jar. This one I've kept in the fridge, and you can keep your sourdough starter in the fridge and only have to feed it once a week if you leave it in the fridge. Now, I've read many times that you don't have to feed it, or you should feed it every week, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world. Others have left it for 4 weeks and the starter's been fine. The other thing I wanted to point out is, and I just have 3 jars because I have 3 jars. I've been giving the mother away to other people, so I've got it at various different stages. Sometimes when you leave your starter, it will get this, I think you can see it here, this sort of liquidy bit on the top that almost looks like I don't know, turpentine or maple syrup. That is good stuff, and you want to stir that back in. And I'll show you what that looks like, if you can see that. It's just, whoops, that's the good stuff though. So you want to stir that in with your spoon, and then carry on and add in your 1/3 flour and your water. So I just stir that all up, and as you can see, the consistency of this. I like it this consistency myself, and I don't worry too much about the consistency. It can be thicker for sure, because all the recipes for bread that I use require the bread to rise for 18 hours. I really don't worry too much about the sourdough starter and whether it's thick and bubbly and it was just fed and bubbly. It's all good. it'll do what it's required to do over the 18 hours. They say if you're going to be making your bread, you should take your sourdough starter, if it's not already on the counter, out the night before to warm up, and probably feed it the night before as well. Anyways, I just want to go to this one to give you a sense of the thickness of it. It's about the same. Now, if I were to leave this out overnight, it would probably get a little bit bubbly, or I could throw some of this into a different container, feed it with the 1/3 and up to the 1/3 water, 1/3 flour, up to 1/3 water. Leave it out on the counter, and it will definitely bubble. Sometimes it can bubble up. It can bubble up about that much. So you have to watch your container. As well, you don't need to put the lid on super tight on these things, just until it closes and doesn't spill out if you were to tip it over. Other than that, that's it for the sourdough starter. One other thing I should mention with the sourdough starter is there may be, when you're dealing with different jars of the starter, like I have here, you might find that one is a little bit more sour than the other because you kept one in the fridge and the other one out on the counter, or vice versa. So you might want to smell your sourdough or your starter before you use it, depending on what bread recipe you're wanting to make. The other thing too is if your sourdough, if you want a little bit more bubbliness, which then creates more sourness often, in your 1/3 cup flour, you could put a little bit, and I only put up to about there, of rye flour. For some reason, the rye flour makes it more sour and a little bit more bubbly, in my case. So I don't put more rye than that, because if I'm going to make a plain sourdough, I don't want the rye flour to appear, because it'll color your starter and make it more brown and flecky. Not that that's the end of the world either, but you don't need a lot of rye, you just need a little bit. And that's it.